Hi, welcome to a tutorial on installing Windows 11 on vSphere 6.7 with PyKMIP and vTPM. So first off, what is PyKMIP? PyKMIP is a Python implementation of KMIP, which is the Key Management Interoperability Protocol, which is used for communication between a key management server, or a KMS, and a cryptographically enabled application. Additionally, PyKMIP is open source and can be found at the GitHub link in the description. So why is this required? Well, if you try to install Windows 11 on a virtual machine, you'll get this error. And that's because the virtual machine does not have a TPM, or Trusted Platform Module, which is a requirement for running Windows 11. The way we get around this is by creating a virtual Trusted Platform Module, or a vTPM, in vSphere. The requirements for installing PyKMIP are a server for PyKMIP to run on, either a VM or a physical, Python, Git to clone the PyKMIP repository, OpenSSL for creating the certificate that vCenter and PyKMIP will use to communicate, and OpenSSH if you'd like to manage your PyKMIP server through an application like PuTTY. So let's jump into our environment. And the first thing we're going to do is a apt-get update upgrade. And this is just to ensure that all of our repositories are up to date and our packages are upgraded. Next, we want to install OpenSSH. Again, this is just for managing your server through PuTTY or another terminal application. If you are planning on using OpenSSH, make sure that you start the service so that you are able to connect to your server. And there we go. So the next step is going to be to create the folders where we install PyKMIP. Make sure you do this as root, because it won't let you make these folders in these directories if you're a standard user. Additionally, you'll want to take ownership of these folders, and that's just to ensure that when we do clone the Git repository, that PyKMIP installs correctly. Next, we want to install the prerequisites for PyKMIP, Python, and some additional libraries. Great. Next, let's install Git so we can clone the PyKMIP repository to the folders we created earlier. When cloning the Git repository, make sure you are in the folder you want to clone the repository to. In this case, I chose the user local folder. Now we can change directory to the folder we created earlier for PyKMIP, and then we can run the PyKMIP installer from the repository we just cloned. When you're installing PyKMIP, make sure you run it as root or the install will fail. And there we go. When creating the certificate that vCenter and PyKMIP will use to communicate, there are several fields that need to be filled out. Country name, state, province name, locality, etc. We want to make sure that we fill all of these out, including the common name. This will ensure that our certificate is accepted by both vCenter and PyKMIP. Great. The last step for creating the certificate is to take ownership of the folders that we're storing the certificates in, just to ensure there are no permission conflicts Next, let's create the server configuration file for PyKMIP. If you're using the same folder structure as I am in this tutorial, then the included configuration file can be found in the description. Great. Now we can start the server and jump into vCenter to complete the configuration. So here we are in vCenter, and we want to click on VMs and Templates, click on our vCenter server, go over to the Configure tab, click on Key Management Servers and Add, and we're going to be setting up a new cluster. Type in a name for our cluster, type in a name for our server, our KMS server. Then we want to set up a IP address. This is the IP address of the KMS server, and the port that we're running on. Default is 5696. Then click Add, click on Trust, and there we go. Now what you want to do is click on KMS server, and you want to make KMS Trust vCenter. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to import our certificate and private key from the KMS server. So let's jump back into our KMS server and copy the certificate and private key into vCenter. When copying your certificate and private key into vCenter, ensure there are no trailing carriage returns, white spaces, and make sure to include the begin certificate and end certificate and begin private key and end private key lines. And there we go. With the certificate imported, the vCenter server trusts the KMS and the KMS trusts vCenter. So now that the KMS is configured to work with vCenter, let's jump into our Windows 11 test VM, and we can add a trusted platform module to the VM and boot it up. If you're able to get to this point where you can select the operating system you would like to install, and you don't get an error saying this PC cannot run Windows 11, then the trusted platform module is working correctly and you're good to go. Great, so our VM just rebooted and we should be getting the Windows 11 setup screen in just a moment. Great, and here we are in the Windows 11 desktop. So that's a quick tutorial on how to set up PyKMIP for use with vCenter and Windows 11. There are some considerations to mention. This is less secure than a physical KMS appliance. The setup is a bit more involved compared to an enterprise KMS solution. There's no high availability with this open source implementation of KMIP. Some of the enterprise grade KMS solutions do include high availability. This implementation of KMIP is not DoD compliant. So if you are using KMIP for BitLocker, this will not satisfy any compliance needs you might have. We're also using a self-signed certificate with this tutorial. You may want to consider using your own certificates or a certificate from a trusted third party. It's worth mentioning that there are a few additional features that a KMS will provide for vCenter. One of those is encryption of the virtual machine through vCenter. So while you're setting up the virtual machine, if you click the box that says encrypt this virtual machine during setup, you can select a VM encryption policy and encrypt the virtual machine configuration files. You can also set up secure boot if you're using Windows 10 or Windows 11. And that's done by checking this enable Windows virtualization based security box. And that's it. I want to thank everyone for sticking around. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on Twitter or in the comments below. And with that, see you next time.